Good evening, spiritual warriors. Welcome to Spiritual Warriorship, where we are studying, discussing books by His Holiness Bhaktitirtha Swami, Spiritual Warrior Series. We've said before there are 6 spiritual warriors, and they're all wonderful books for helping us to grow, knowing who we are, our relationship with God, and how to cope in the world today. We're now on Spiritual Warrior 6, whose full title, Beyond Fanaticism, Terrorism, and War. Discover the Peace Solution. So I think we're all ready for that. I pray that those who have been steady are finding something in these words from Bhaktitirtha Swami and techniques, technologies he's giving us to make your life more fulfilling and worthwhile and meaningful. I've been away, 2 weeks I think it seems. I've been away a while. I missed you all. But I hope you've been working, using, applying the messages that have been coming to you, because these thoughts and these messages given to us are meant to be applied in your everyday life so that you're applying the spiritual concepts and you'll see how they work in your life, and you'll understand who you are, who God is in your life, and your relationship with Him. So we'll continue tonight with Chapter 2. We touched on it the last time I was here, but a quick run through, we didn't get that far. And the title of the chapter is, Why Do We Suffer? And I imagine that's a question we may have asked ourselves many times. And he begins by discussing the question of suffering. And what does he do? He starts with a quote from Bhagavad Gita. I hope you all are reading your Bhagavad Gita. But he says, coming to the platform of love of God is a process. And that's what spiritual life is all about. The ultimate goal of spiritual life is love of God. He reminds us that the Lord has no favorites. And he tells us that in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, text 29, the Lord says, I envy no one, nor am I partial to anyone. I am equal to all. But whoever renders service unto me in devotion. Remember, this is a process we call Bhakti Yoga. What does that mean? Linking, Bhakti Yoga, linking with God through Bhakti, which is service, devotional service. Then he's telling us, whoever renders service to me in devotion is a friend, is in me, and I am also a friend of him, and I'll say her. Now, just as the Supreme Lord is equal to all, the different agents of the Lord are also kind and equal to everyone. At the same time, when we see and experience so much suffering in the world, we may wonder about the nature of God's kindness and doubt the kindness of His representatives. This is why the first thing he said is to love of God, the process. It's a process. And the process of studying brings about understanding. All of us question the reason for suffering at different times. Why does Krishna, or God, who is controlling everything, allow his topmost servants to undergo so many hardships, inconveniences, and attacks? After all, if a Vaishnava or servant of God must undergo extensive suffering, why should people even serve the Lord? In fact, we sometimes see that those who worship demigods experience more material prosperity and less suffering, or so it appears, than the devotees of the Supreme Lord. We may begin to think, why should I go through all these austerities just to suffer intensely as a servant of God? We should really think about this topic from time to time. Otherwise, when we go through difficulties without understanding their deeper purpose, we can lose faith and decide to renounce the service of God. So there's that word understanding again. We must understand. We might then resort to temporary and unhealthy shelters. We might even feel that the price we have to pay to reach the goal is not worth the ultimate result. We may think that way. But listen to what he tells us. Suffering has a reason. And again, he quotes from Bhagavad Gita that explains that the material world is in fact very difficult to overcome and is full of misery. But the Lord can help us if we surrender unto him. He quotes Bhagavad Gita 8:16. From the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all are places of misery wherein repeated birth and death take place. But one who attains my abode, O son of Kunti, never takes birth again. Now basically, we want to make the best of a bad bargain by using every situation for our growth, for our spiritual growth. And again, it's good to even, as he said here, think about this topic. And it's good to stop and think sometimes, how important is your spiritual life to you? Are you really determined to grow spiritually and advance no matter what? And he talks about that. We'll get to that. Overcoming obstacles. So we are in the material world. We are in a material body. But as he said, we make the best of a bad bargain. And what do we do? How do we do that? By using every situation for our growth, our spiritual growth. Now, of course, in spite of our endeavor to serve the Lord, we must still deal with this material energy. Nevertheless, we can eventually transcend the misery. And that may sound, how is that going to happen? But I tell you, I remember when I started out with this teaching, and I heard the scriptures, Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, I had a phrase I used to use when things, especially some of these difficulties, if I heard it from the scripture, I accepted it as so, and felt that I could work through and move through that situation. And again, this comes from intense study and an intense desire to know and establish your relationship with God as His servant. He says that since our material bodies are not yet fully spiritualized, we carry particular burdens and karma. And I'm sure all of you out there know about karma, have read about karma. Sometimes, due to different types of karma, we experience suffering. We might have karmic reactions chasing us that will later cause some disturbances, even if we have given up our previous sinful activities and now follow a religious lifestyle. Because don't forget, this karma has been coming with us lifetime after lifetime. But I always like to feel this lifetime, at this stage of my life, I have been guided to, led to a teacher and a teaching that tells me, gives me the absolute truth, and this teacher who breaks it down for greater understanding. There's the word. As you get the understanding, you can move through the situations. Suffering also comes from aparadhs or offenses. Again, we've spoken of this before, how one must be mindful, alert of what one says and what one's action is and how we treat others. Aparadhs or offenses. We might be engaged in devotional activities, but due to some improper activities, such as offense to devotees, which we call Vaishnava aparadh, and again, if you're in a community with devotees, you're a devotee yourself, be mindful and aware of how you speak to each other, or how you speak to others, how you treat them, how you care for them, because all you're doing, you want to become purified now that you have this knowledge, so that you can grow and get out of the misery, as he said, transcend the misery of this material world, even while in our material bodies. Then there are offenses also to the spiritual teachers, Guru aparadh, and to the holy places, Dham aparadh. And even while chanting the holy name of God, we can make offenses, not being attentive, talking while chanting, and say even driving while chanting, because our attention and focus needs to be on the sound of that holy name, because there's no difference between that, the name, the sound of the name, and God Himself. So he says we might suffer imbalances and stagnations that can cause intense suffering. Therefore, when we are suffering, we can look to see if perhaps we have committed offenses, or whether it stems from a natural process of spiritual maturation. This material world is full of miseries. And think of that sentence as he gave it to us. When we are suffering, we can look to see if perhaps we have committed offenses, or whether it stems from a natural process of spiritual maturation. That's maturity right there. And we all suffer. Material world means suffering, but when it starts, when you feel it, and when you, oh, what am I in? This is really a difficult time. Do you look to see if perhaps you've committed offenses. How did I speak to that devotee? What did I think about that spiritual master? Because the mind, we've gone through mastery of the mind, right? One of the qualities. So it isn't about first thing pointing, it's your fault that I'm suffering. It needs to do as, and this he's just giving us such wonderful advice. Look to see if perhaps we have committed offenses, or if we're suffering in order to mature in our spiritual life. Most importantly, the difficulties do not always have to have a negative effect. Very careful. And that's another thing, to stop and think. He mentions here, we really should think about this topic so that when we go through difficulties, if we don't understand the deeper purpose, then we can lose faith or decide to renounce service to God. So it's really a wonder, it's a process, as we started out saying. You look to see if you've committed offenses. And you also come think and realize that it's not always negative or have a negative effect. The challenges on the spiritual path can function as catalysts to help us increase our meditation on Krishna or God. As we struggle and suffer, we especially want to use the suffering as a means for growth and purification. And know that takes courage, determination, because when we're suffering or in pain, I know all you want to do is get rid of the pain. That time to stop and see that I make offenses. But if you're maturing spiritually, through that pain you can stop and see, and sometimes you get a realization. Sometimes a devotee will suffer because the Lord is giving them mercy. Yeah, the Lord's pain, suffering, yeah. They might have to go through specific challenges that God sends in rapid succession so that they can overcome an obstacle and move on. Now this understanding, as I'm reading, thinking of myself and how that happens, again it comes from your sadhana, your study, your chanting, your realization, if you will, of who God is, your connection to God, that you're an eternal spiritual being, part and parcel, and that there is a connection. And with this, you can then see things differently rather than looking for somebody to blame, and know that you're working through things in order to be purified, to get closer to the Lord. He says that there are times in people's lives when they just have a series of difficulties. Guess we can all relate to that. Actually, we can see it as a special blessing when the Supreme Lord sends so many tests. And again, I remember in Spiritual Warrior 3, in a chapter on improving our strength, or something on that order, where he talks about spiritual life being challenging, and that we get challenges, but what the challenges are qualifying tests to see if we are serious about reaching the ultimate goal. And you can, I mean, that's not unusual. Everyday life, if you're going to school, you're in high school, college, wherever, you're studying something to make a change in your life, you're going to have tests. Because the worst test is the surprise test, right? But if you expect you have a date, you know on that date I'm going to get tested on this, you study it so that you can pass and move on. And that's what he's talking about here, us moving on. We can see it as a special blessing when the Supreme Lord sends so many tests. And this is your spiritual growth. He sees our sincerity in wanting to move faster toward the goal. Again, the author is assuming that one who's reading, or some who are reading, or most who are truly sincere in their spiritual life path and want to move faster rather than getting stuck and stagnated. So what happens? He, the Lord, arranges events that can help us burn up negative karma from the past and move forward faster. What a loving Lord. So that suffering can end. And you can move ahead spiritually. Sometimes we are acting properly. And it is this proper activity that is creating some of the challenges. It might appear to be suffering, but the Lord is letting it come upon us so that we can once and for all put it behind us. Sometimes the difficulties allow us to shine even more. And just hearing this, and I'm hearing it myself, I've read it over and over, it really takes a determination and a strong desire to advance on your spiritual path and have your spiritual life open up. No one, the author says, has to undergo as many challenges and so-called setbacks as pure representatives of the Lord, because their entire existence is anti-material, in the world but not of the world. They go against the current of material energy. For instance, Haridas Thakur, a great devotee of the Lord in Vaishnav history, was flogged in many marketplaces by government officials who could not tolerate his intense devotional practices. Remember the story, I don't know if you remember the story, one part of it is the soldiers who were flogging him, beating him, and he's just still chanting, moving along and in ecstasy, were begging him, if you don't die, we'll die. How can you still be moving ahead, moving, and we're beating you like this? Nobody could live like that. And if you don't die, we're going to die, get killed. They'll kill us. But it says that he literally felt ecstasy during the incident due to his love of God. And also in that story later, I remember hearing when Lord Chaitanya told him he didn't feel the pain because he was taking the blows. That's love of God. God looks out for his devotee. So in spite of spiritual torture, he did not feel the pain. There are times when Greek devotees of the Lord experience what might seem to be problems. But due to their absorption in love of God, they are happy to make sacrifices on behalf of the Lord. You notice what he brought in here and putting out at us. Due to love of God. Haridas Thakur didn't feel the pain. Here he's talking about others who suffer, have problems, but due to their absorption in the love of God. And that's what Bhakti Yoga is about. That's what our devotional service, to increase our love of God. So they are happy to make sacrifices on behalf of the Lord. An event that would give an ordinary person suffering and pain stimulates their consciousness and causes them to experience great expression of love and devotion. So those of us, and I've heard it, are really not ordinary persons, those who are chanting that holy name, hearing the scriptures, associating with devotees and sadhus, and just being as fixed as possible on the Lord as we go through our daily duty to maintain ourselves. Are special, not ordinary. And you can have experiences such as this. The author tells us that in other cases, some of the acharyas were attacked by impersonalists or by smarta Brahmins, which he called impotent priests, who were often arrogant and self-righteous fundamentalists. We see such attacks in the life of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, a great Vaishnava devotee of the Lord who lived in India from 1838 to 1915. He was exposing the hypocrisy among the cheaters. And a cheating person who had some mystic powers tried to curse the whole family and destroy them. And there in that story we see that for a while the attacks became effective. Bhaktivinoda's son was viciously attacked. But he, with that going on, still went forth to demolish that cheater. God never says that if we serve him, we will not experience any difficulty. Or that our lives will unfold very expediently. But Krishna does say that his devotees will never perish. He lets us know that ultimately he will protect the devotees and always receive their love and service. And again, just reading this and thinking, yeah, he says that, but look at how I'm suffering. But if we recall what we said before, there's a reason for the suffering. And we must take into effect the karma aspect of our lifetimes. And then, closer to home, we need to check and see, are we making offenses? Because that will bring about difficulties. So this is Prabhupada, I love it, says that this is a scientific philosophy. And if we are serious about it and observant in it and follow what we're given, we'll see, even if it means we are going through some suffering. How about the case of Arjuna? Remember, Krishna was personally present with him, but he still had to undergo an intense challenge and make life and death decisions. It wasn't a, what do you call it, a party on that chariot out there on that battlefield. He had a lot of work to do. He had to deal with adversarial conditions in spite of the Lord's personal presence. So we are to exhibit tolerance with the understanding, there's that word again, in this chapter it's come up quite a bit, the understanding that every situation is a part of the devotional experience. Every situation is a part of the devotional experience. And therefore try to be less distracted by the material energy. Because that material energy is pretty strong out there and it's pulling and always pulling. Now, we understand that we often grow the fastest from our challenges and suffering. When we're suffering, we really begin to think deeply about our lives. Who am I really? Why am I suffering? Who am I really? Where is my placement with God? We do. Suffering makes us cry out to God, and if you cry out and serious about your spiritual life, you will go to deeper places. It is often when we suffer the most that we cry out to the Lord. Sometimes the Lord places us in a situation so that we cry out more and increase our ability to receive more. The Lord reciprocates to your cry to Him, to your prayers to Him, to your surrender to Him. And you can receive more. Again, in a serious, have to be serious, not that, oh wow, I'm going through this stuff. Oh God, help me, yeah, you help me this time, I won't do it again. Maybe, you know, that kind of thing. But a sincerity, and we used that word before. It helps us to not take for granted what we do have. And it can make our love stronger if we do have a foundation of love. And how does that come about? Because we will see the reciprocation of the Lord. We are seriously crying out to Him. And usually what happens, that's when the surrender begins to happen, because that suffering can be so. You realize there's nothing you can do yourself. A higher power, greater power, has to help you get out of it. And then if you're studying and you're on the spiritual path, you realize who that is, who's the controller, who's the arranger. Dear Lord, I want to surrender to you. I'm surrendering to you. Help me, please. And then you see. When we have faith and understanding, these will also get stronger. Go over that again. It is often when we suffer the most that we cry out to the Lord. Sometimes the Lord places us in a situation so that we do cry out more and increase our ability to receive more. It helps us to not take for granted what we do have. And it can make our love stronger if we do have a foundation of love. Now again, I go back to Spiritual Warrior 2, first chapter, The School of Love. If you've got that book, and take it out again and read The School of Love. It gives so much insight and understanding of how love fits in our lives. In fact, when it says life is a school of love, and the soul, who we really are, which is eternal, is made for love. So as he's speaking here of that it will make our love stronger, again, he's assuming we are understanding this and giving love and sharing love and endeavoring to love God or reach that goal of loving God. In the process, and that's how we opened, didn't we? Loving God, obtaining love of God is a process. In the process, we try to access even more understanding. He's using that word quite a bit, understanding, so that we can go deeper and deeper. God has many ways to make himself available. Show his mercy and show the amazing powers of his devotees. Why not? He's God. Everything. In spite of what might appear to be obstacles, his devotees become glorious. It is amazing that the Lord allows the atheists to become so powerful that even the demigods fear them. At the same time, we see the ultimate outcome. We also have to be careful that we maintain our spiritual practices and avoid what could be detrimental to our spiritual lives. We also have to be careful that we maintain our spiritual practices and avoid what could be detrimental to our spiritual life. Spiritual practices are important. They're given to us by God himself, by his acharyas, and his people, his descendants and managers, if you will, that he sends to help us remember. And it's spelled out in our scriptures. The stages of devotional service, and we're talking about serving with devotion. Hearing, chanting, remembering, and it goes on. Study them if you haven't looked at them recently. But we must maintain our spiritual practices so that they will strengthen us. And as we're maintaining them, this love for God will develop, because in our everyday lives we will see how God is reciprocating. We will see how he is protecting us. We'll see how he doesn't allow us to perish, because these difficulties isn't something that just comes, one day in 5 years. Oh, I had a difficult time 3 years ago. No, it's almost every day. But if we are maintaining our spiritual practices and avoiding what would be detrimental to our spiritual life, we will see, as he just said, how the Lord will reciprocate more with us. So the burden is, like, if you will, on us. to help move through these suffering and difficulties and see them as blessings from the Lord to help us turn more to Him so we can receive more from Him, as this been said. Now we have to be aware that Maya is waiting for us to weaken. She is enticing us to participate in her allurements, and as soon as we make that little step, a whole avenue of arrangements and complexities begin to come down on us. She's a very efficient servant of the Lord. And her job is to make sure no nonsense gets through to Him. And she's there to offer these things that if we're not serious, as he says here, we begin to participate in that now, whatever allurements that it is. But if we're serious, we can, like Jesus said, get behind me, Satan, get behind me, Maya. So we still have, what is it, 841. This chapter is really exciting. I mean, for me it's exciting. I don't know about you. Let's go a little bit more into any questions. Let me stop here for a moment. Any questions, any comments about what we have just been through? Because this is, I want to say juicy. Well, that's what comes up, but it's an exciting step if we can hear, imbibe, practice, and live our lives. Because we are in the material world, there will be stuff, but He's telling us how to see it and what will help us to get through it, and how God works in our lives. He's not leaving out God. He's saying, telling us. Okay, any comments or questions?
Bhakti Carol asks about a quote from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, text 29. What is meant by is in me?
Did I read 929? 929. I envy no one, nor am I partial to anyone. I am equal to all, but whoever renders service unto me in devotion is a friend, is in me, and I'm also a friend to him. What does that mean? You're in His heart. You're in Him. He's the Father. He's the giver of everything. So if you are serving Him in devotion as a friend, He's in me. I know Him. I love Him. I will protect Him. Okay, does that help? Because we are His part and parcels from the very, very beginning of our lives. That's our spirit soul. Okay, Carol? Anything else? Anybody else?
She's asking, in His heart, and then she says thank you.
She said thank you. What's that, in His heart? She's asking that, or?
She was asking that, and then she said thank you.
Okay. Don't forget, we're part of Him. We're His part and parcel. So we're in Him, and He's spiritual too. So we're in Him everywhere. Let's look at the great devotees for guidance, looking to great devotees for guidance. And again, all of this cannot be done on our own. We can start out, but we must find a guide, a mentor, who has him or herself moved through, has that understanding. That's the word he keeps using. Has the understanding of the relationship with God and how God protects and cares for His devotees. And that kind of person can encourage us to move through our difficulty and suffering, remembering how it can be a blessing. The Lord also puts his servants in difficulty to glorify them. We see this pattern occur in the lives of many great teachers throughout the various various theologies of the world. For instance, the fact that Muhammad was illiterate made his ability to present his theology to the world even more glorious. Furthermore, Muhammad began to spread his teachings. The rulers, as he began to spread his teachings, the rulers at that time persecuted him and even tried to assassinate him. However, he never wavered from his beliefs in spite of all the difficulties. The life of Jesus also exemplifies this in a very dynamic way. He too faced many trials and challenges, each of which only increased his fame. For instance, the various temptations presented to him exhibited his deep faith in God and his steadfastness. He could not be swayed by any negative influence. Even his death and resurrection, the ultimate trial, increased his glory rather than diminished them. It is in part because of his extraordinary life and death that his teachings have endured throughout the centuries. The great Vaishnava, teacher and founder of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, similarly had to confront one difficulty after another, but they only magnified his glorious position. His feet would not have shone through to the same extent had he been a multimillionaire or a huge industrialist who already had businesses all over the world. In such a case, a person could easily use their contacts and money to make in different parts of the world to start spiritual commissions. It makes it even more dynamic, and he seemingly had nothing material, but Krishna gave him practically the entire world in which to preach love of God. When Srila Prabhupada was leaving the planet, we could understand that his sickness partly resulted from the sins of his disciples. Furthermore, the fact that Srila Prabhupada came to America at such a late age makes his life even more unique. He came with only, a handful of coins and hardly knew anyone. In spite of all the material difficulties, he was able to institute a worldwide mission. Srila Prabhupada also had to endure many difficulties while trying to fulfill his spiritual master's desire by spreading his mission. He suffered heart attacks on his trip to America and later had essential items stolen which he needed for his mission. So if you're endeavoring to preach and encourage others and there seems to be difficulty, it's glorifying you. See them as blessings. As we look at some of the lives of great Vaishnavas and saints of all traditions, I think we went through some of those saints during one of our other spiritual warrior books of how they went through great difficulty and suffering but stayed fixed in their love of God. So we may wonder why they must suffer so much, but it helps us to appreciate the possibility for something greater. As these great souls overcame so many obstacles, the Lord arranged for them to have distinct guides. Their actions and words are important because they give us a better idea of what we are to do in similar situations and how it is to be done. So if you're working on a project or you're really wanting to serve and it seems difficult, read the story of some of these acharyas and past saints and see what they went through, but they became glorified. As we look at the pure servants of God, we can understand how much they are suffering in our behalf. We can see how the Lord is using them in these amazing dramas to help us have a deeper understanding of how to return back to Him. We see how God is using them to show even more dynamically how good ultimately triumphs over evil, and to show the importance of strong faith and perseverance. So I'm going to close there. Oh, just a little bit. What do we have? A few more minutes. Any comments, questions? Okay. We see in these amazing pastimes that when the devotees of the Lord are suffering, the Lord is always caring for them. And ultimately, they are trying to carry out the Lord's desire in spite of obstacles or even attacks. Can you feel yourself in that situation? We're in this material world. We've been told that the difficulties will occur. We've been told some of it is karmic, some of it is to help us to grow faster. So if you can, I just feel, what was that sentence? We see in these amazing pastimes that when the devotees of the Lord are suffering, we're all suffering, the Lord is always caring for them. And ultimately, they are trying to carry out the Lord's desire in spite of obstacles or even attacks. However, the servants of the Lord expect opposition in this material realm. They realize that Maya will always try to find some way to attack. We should realize that this material world is full of danger, and what we unnecessarily suffer more when we become captured by sense gratification. So I'll close there tonight. Next week, we'll return to look at the next section called our rightful claim. And I hope this has helped if you are suffering at this particular moment, this night, that hearing this can help you and to look at your situation differently. See how God, in the past you may have had suffering and difficulty, and how it worked itself out, especially if you realize at that time to turn to the Lord, cry out to Him in prayer, or chant His name more seriously and attentively, and you saw changes come about. But it's a part of our process to become strong and to reach our ultimate goal of what? Love of God. So I love you all. I thank you all for being there. Who's on there? Anybody I know?
Virgil, Bhuvan Mohan, Surabi, and Bhakti Carol.
Okay. Thank you all for being there. Have a wonderful week. And I look forward to seeing you. And bring a friend next time. Hare Krishna.